My name is Angelique Medina. I'm with ThousandEyes, and I'm part of the product marketing team. And we're going to talk today about the integrations that were recently announced between ThousandEyes and the Cisco networking platforms. But before we do that, I want to provide a very high-level overview of what it is that ThousandEyes does, just for context. So as we run through and talk about the integrations and some examples of what this looks like, we'll have some view as to what it is that ThousandEyes is providing. And then we'll jump into the specific platforms that we announced recently and what that integration looks like. And then we're going to spend the bulk of our time looking at examples and specific scenarios of how ThousandEyes augments Cisco SD-WAN visibility, and we'll do that from within the product. And so with that, for those of you who are not familiar with ThousandEyes, at a high level, ThousandEyes is focused on providing looking at application performance from the standpoint of users, so how users experience applications. And of course, we know that users are connecting to applications over a network, and in most cases, many networks. And because a lot of applications today are being delivered from the cloud, they're connecting over the internet, so ISPs and transit providers, as well as cloud provider and SaaS provider networks. And all of these domains are outside of the management and control of IT. And that becomes a challenge in terms of understanding how you can address issues and ensure a good experience for users. So ThousandEyes is focused on these external environments. We're generating network telemetry and application telemetry for these external networks and applications. And then we're correlating that together and enriching it with metadata like geolocation and operator information, as well as BGP routing. And from that, we're able to provide a holistic picture of all of the different factors that are influencing how a user is experiencing an application at any given point in time. And in order to do that, we need to have a lot of different eyes on the applications. So we have these cloud agents that are deployed throughout the internet and cloud environments. And from those locations, they're able to look at how an application is performing. We also have these agents that are deployed on end user devices. Again, these are active monitoring agents that are generating synthetic traffic to applications or services. And the end user vantage point is looking at how a specific user is experiencing an application from where they're located. And what we're looking at in the middle are really these vantage points that are designed to be deployed by enterprises within their own environment, so environments that they manage. It's a lightweight software-based agent, and it can deploy in a variety of form factors. You can deploy it, for example, in a cloud VPC or on-prem, say branch office or data center. Now, when you're looking to get visibility at scale, you have a lot of sites, you may have your data center locations. It can be a challenge for users to not only scale in terms of hosting, but also in agent management. And so with this announcement that's been made recently, the idea here is that we're making ThousandEyes vantage points effectively ubiquitous throughout Cisco network platforms. So
Angelique, sorry, I have a question about the previous slide.
Yes.
And I can't see here any, mobile endpoint in terms of, phones, for example.
Right.
That are becoming more and more common, or even, IoT devices.
Yes, that's a good point. We don't currently have a mobile agent. In terms of IT, there's some, not something we can get into details here, but there's some work being done to address some IoT use cases. The end user vantage point or the agent that can deploy on user devices, something that has the ability to be repurposed for those types of use cases. But yes, today we don't have a mobile agent.
Okay, thank you.
So the idea here is that we're effectively embedding the ThousandEyes agent across these these various hardware platforms. So earlier this year announced the integration with the Catalyst 9K. We talked about that at a previous Tech Field Day. My colleague addressed that. The most recent announcement has been around the edge router series, as well as the data center switching platform. So the idea here is that we're providing options and effectively visibility outposts from which IT can get visibility into external environments, because it's not just the users who are sitting in branch offices that are consuming more applications or business SaaS, for example. It's also the applications themselves. They're connecting to APIs, or they might be connecting to workloads that are hosted within a cloud provider. And so the need to gain that external visibility is really important. And this is a way to make that really easy to do. So you have effectively a turnkey agent that's embedded in each of these platforms, and they can be managed with their respective management consoles.
I have a question. Okay.
Yes.
So if you have these agents and it's embedded into the hardware, especially with what we've seen on the news, what kind of, and you might be getting to this, what kind of security is there for this not to be, because I'm sure that could be a lot of damage if that was compromised.
So there is some partitioning in terms of the application hosting environment. There's already an application hosting environment that's available within these platforms where, you know, it's effectively siloed from the underlying system. So there's not really a security issue there. You can kind of think, and we'll touch on this in terms of the SD-WAN implementation, but you know, you could kind of think of it as almost just like a host that's sitting behind, for example, the router. It's not, it doesn't have access to anything at a system level. So it's not really a concern from a security standpoint.
Okay.
And so in terms of some of the details on this, so the Catalyst 8300, 8200, and the ISR 4K are what are covered in terms of the SD-WAN platforms. Deploys as a Docker container. In the initial implementation, it's just going to have a single interface, but there are plans to add additional interfaces to make it a little bit easier to do some of the more complicated or complex, like full mesh testing between SD-WAN sites, for example. And this is going to be available in August. So it's a 17.6 release, as well as the ability to manage these agents is in the vManage 20.6. And so there's a feature template that enables you to very easily deploy these across whatever devices you select. You will need a ThousandEyes subscription in order to leverage these agents from a testing standpoint, and then you'll effectively bind the agents to your account, and then you can use it to run active tests from that particular agent. The Nexus 9K, I'm not going to touch on this too much. This is going to be coming up a little bit later this year around the October-November timeframe. But the idea here is that you won't need to upgrade in order to take advantage of this. You'll be able to just deploy it once that's available. So in terms of the visibility that we're providing and sort of extending from a Cisco SD-WAN standpoint. So just at a high level, and we'll get a little bit more detail on this. So, you know, with Cisco SD-WAN, you obviously have some visibility that allows you to optimize path selection. But beyond the WAN, you're not able to see issues like that are occurring further upstream in ISP providers or in cloud providers that may be impacting performance or the application itself. And also within the underlay for an SD-WAN fabric, you know, if you've moved to SD-WAN, the implication is that you're much more internet dependent. And so getting visibility into these best effort networks where you don't necessarily have an SLA like you would with MPLS is really important. The other thing is, in particular, having the agent on the hosting, on the router itself, eliminates the need for external compute, which when you're talking about branch offices or SD-WAN locations, that can be, you know, especially there, a challenge in terms of scale. And unlike a data center, you may not have access to, the network team might not have access to compute. In terms of like the specific visibility, you know, again, with Cisco SD-WAN, you're getting measurements of network telemetry from point to point. So this could be between the SD-WAN endpoints or between an SD-WAN endpoint and an application. And you can see between those 2 points what the network performance is, and you can get metrics like packet loss, latency, and jitter. And that's valuable information in order to make path selection determinations. But what it doesn't enable you to do, and this is really why ThousandEyes comes in, is to understand the specific network path. So you can see each individual hop, not only in the SD-WAN underlay, but also beyond the SD-WAN fabric into transit providers, ISPs, as well as cloud and SaaS provider networks. And that can be important for a number of reasons. I'll talk about this a little bit. For example, in some situations, you might have two service providers. One may not be performing, consistently may not be performing as well as they should. You want to be able to troubleshoot and address those issues and not just favor, for example, one provider. So the network telemetry that we provide is also correlated with application performance. And that's important because it enables you to understand the context for this network performance. It may be that you have issues like a spike in network latency that doesn't necessarily impact how an application is performing. And so it may not be a priority to address it. And vice versa. You might have an application issue and you don't necessarily see anything happening from a network standpoint. So having that application context is really important for troubleshooting purposes. So this, again, enables the IT to very quickly pinpoint where an issue is occurring, who's responsible, and then, address the issues, whether it's the underlying transport for the fabric or beyond the SD-WAN fabric.
Angelica, I have a couple of questions. I mean,
yes.
I'm not a networking guy, so maybe I'm getting this totally wrong, but actually, I don't really understand the role of the agent. Is it just a telemetry tool, so it pushes data to some server, some service, whatever, or can I query it from the outside directly? So it's a two-way communication and probably more attackable from an hacker, or it could pose some security risks. So because you are exposing a lot of information. So and all the communication is encrypted, and how it works. So that's the question.
Yeah. So basically, what the agent is doing is it's generating synthetic traffic. So it is doing this in terms of like network. Like there's basically network probing as well as simulating connecting to an application. So you might do like a HTTP GET request, and then it's so none of the traffic it's not looking at production traffic. Basically, it's not collecting it. It's not looking at it. It is entirely synthetic traffic just to basically get measurements. So there's and in terms of two-way communication, do you mean in terms of pushing the telemetry to the ThousandEyes app, or do you mean in terms of connecting to something external?
I would expect that there is a specific set of things that this agent does, and so it collects information and it pushes to the server. But actually, can I modify its behavior from a third point, which is not the agent and the server? Maybe accessing to it and change how they collects the data, or routing the data to another location.
No, so it's only designed to effectively talk to ThousandEyes. And then, from ThousandEyes, basically, like our SaaS application, because all of the data is basically pushed to our SaaS app, and these agents are just distributed and generating these synthetic traffic flows. They don't we do have an API, but it's not at the agent level. It's for the SaaS application. So there's not something where somebody can go in and configure, a test at an agent level. This is really just designed to execute a active or kind of a test based on the parameters that are given to it by ThousandEyes and the SaaS application. So there's no kind of ability to have a third party effectively connecting to a particular agent and making a change to the agent.
So I saw that the agents on the UCS devices were either Docker or Linux, I guess. what is it on? What are the agents on the Windows and the Apple devices?
Those are slightly different agents. So those are not Docker containers. They effectively, so there's a browser component to it, and then there's sort of a system level one that so it's not a Docker or anything like that. It's basically designed for user laptops.
Okay.
And it does have access, it does have system, it basically has some system level access in order to generate some of the traffic from the device.
I'm getting the questions around security. I'm kind of in the mist here on how you are going to manage all of that in a secure and tightened way, so you won't get something on your systems that can harm you really bad.
Yeah, I can say that we're really like from a security standpoint, like we're extremely security conscious. We have regular audits that we do. I mean, we're used by some of the largest financial services organizations around the globe. Like most of the top banks use us. They go through thorough kind of audits of, all of the agents that we use, whether it's ones that are deployed on user devices as well as on devices within their own environments. So from the standpoint of, is there any issue in terms of these being compromised? I can say that from the standpoint of some of these very security conscious organizations, they're not concerned. And we can maybe in terms of like specifics on the agent and kind of how they're deployed in terms of the endpoint and the enterprise agent, we can maybe get into the details of that offline. So one of the things, again, it's important to remember that this is not looking at anything. It's not looking at user traffic. It's not collecting anything from the production network. It's just generating some synthetic traffic. So there's, you're basically, sending a ping to a server, or you're maybe doing like an HTTP GET request or something like that. So there's nothing from the standpoint of information that is necessarily compromising.
I think that's what we're having a problem with, and we can probably take it offline maybe, but I think the problem is that information, if it's compromised, is really important information, right? And these are actually the same tools that if somebody penetrated a network, it's the same kind of stuff they do. And it's really important for the applications and the new types of applications that we have. I guess I know for myself, I'm having a hard time wrapping my head around, okay, so I don't think putting something behind a firewall, and I don't think something, I don't think that's enough to ease my security concern, especially given the security breaches we've seen in the past year. So I think that's where we're going. This information is important information that could lead somebody to very easily, if they were able to get this information, to infiltrate your business, and like this would be a great tool for them. So
well, I mean, remember, like these are designed really to look at external environments. So for example, like this is sitting on the router edge, and you're collecting, network telemetry from your ISP or the transit provider. So you're looking effectively at, what is the IP address between my location, so not my internal environment, but from my location to, say, a SaaS provider. So you are uncovering things like the IP address of the router hops between your site and, say, a cloud provider or a SaaS provider. But that's all information that is collectible with standard sort of network troubleshooting tools, right? Like you can spin up and basically issue a ping to Google, for example, and you can collect some information. This is not anything that's IP or sensitive. what we're effectively doing is making this scalable, better, getting around some of the issues in terms of certain platforms that may not, or certain end devices that may not support some of this, some of this telemetry that we collect. So it's not anything that anyone couldn't get from any other, like using other types of standard tools. So the
That's
difference
helpful.
is that, yeah, so the difference, if you think about an application provider, for example, because like we're used by like a lot of the top SaaS providers, they want to understand how users are experiencing their application from the outside. So what they'll do is they'll have these things positioned. Now, in theory, they could do a number of different things from the outside. They could do like, they could ping their application, they could simulate a user interacting with the application using like scripts, for example, but doing that at scale and then correlating that network performance with the application performance is really challenging, and keeping a historical record and reporting on it. And so it's important to understand that this is like what we're looking at here is things that you need to be able to do when you can actually kind of do different things to get some of this information and kind of cobble it together. But this way you're making it scalable, you're making it really easy to consume and look at and report on. So, I hope that sort of addresses the security thing, because again, we're collecting information that's kind of out there and is available to be, collected.
Yeah, that's very helpful, that explanation. Thanks a lot.
Sure. All right, so okay, so as far as time, we can kind of power through some of these examples. So in terms of the WAN underlay, we're looking at here 2 different sites. So we have a branch office on the left-hand side, we have a data center on the right-hand side, we have 2 edge routers connecting those sites. And we can see, this is an encrypted tunnel that's connecting those two routers, those 2 sites. And, we don't see any of the underlying network nodes, but we can see that there's an issue in terms of delay. So there's a spike in latency, but we don't necessarily know where. And that's really where ThousandEyes comes in. So these are, again, these are service provider nodes between 2 sites. So you have your ISPs or your transit providers, and you're able to see specifically where latency might be occurring, or if there's suboptimal routing. So here, I know that these 2 locations are within the same region. So right off the bat, I can see that there's a large number of hops that are between those 2 sites. So that's probably an indication that there's less than optimal routing between these 2 locations. So sort of an example of the difference between just knowing the end-to-end metrics and performance versus understanding what is contributing to that. So which service provider, which node. So this is an example where there was a branch office connecting to regional hub, and they had sort of inconsistency in terms of latency. So they would have spikes in latency, would go from like less than 30 milliseconds to 70 milliseconds. And so, they wanted to understand what was happening. So when they were looking at the network path using ThousandEyes, and here we're sort of aggregating nodes and looking at them from the standpoint of location and service provider, we can see that there's one of their service providers is connecting to their data center, which was located in Singapore, but they're connecting through Hong Kong. So that basically was what was contributing to the increase in latency. And then when they looked at when latency was normal, they could see that it was due to a more optimal path that was being taken by their other service provider. And so, this is an instance in which, they had consistently poor performance from one service provider and expected performance from another. And while, you could use automated routing to prefer one provider over the other, you want to be able to address things that are systemic and also manage your providers to make sure that they're meeting your performance expectations. So this is About a couple of weeks later, they were able to resolve the issue with that provider. And here we can see that now they have consistent performance across both service providers. So this is an example of, by providing this type of data to their in this case, one of their ISPs that was connected to this branch office, they were able to get this routing issue addressed. So it's not just about kind of knowing the performance, also being able to action on it. And here we can see that they have consistent performance now. And so this is an example of, an issue where there was a spike in response time for a Microsoft application. So they were hitting the login page of the application. They had normal app response time, but then, we see really significant elevation in response time. And you can then go down and understand, is this the application or is the network? And we can see that this corresponds with an increase in network latency. This is something where they were able to determine that during normal typical performance, this particular site was connecting into Microsoft's network locally. So they were connecting to, they were basically entering Microsoft's network in San Jose, which is close to San Francisco, and also connecting to an app server there. And when the performance network latency spiked, it was due to the fact that they were getting connected into Microsoft's network in LA, and then they were hitting an app server in Atlanta. And so this is an example where even if you're optimizing your paths and maybe you're connecting to a cloud provider via an Equinix facility, maybe you're breaking out your traffic very close to where the cloud provider is located, you can't control how traffic is routed in the cloud provider or the SaaS provider. And so being able to see how they're routing traffic and then have the ability to, share this data with the service provider or the cloud provider is very helpful in addressing issues. So it's, you don't necessarily need to have direct control over the network. You can share this information out and get it addressed by the provider. So just quickly, one of the things that's really important as well is just, again, the application context. So we enable you to understand how the network is impacting the application and vice versa. So you don't necessarily need to address issues at the network level if it's not impacting app performance and vice versa. And so having this ability to see both is really important as you manage the experience of users or applications that are sitting in your data center. So in terms of what's next, the August release is when the iOS XE 17.6 and vManage 20.6 will be available. And we highly encourage folks out there to sign up for a free trial. It's very intuitive to use, and you don't necessarily have to deploy anything. You can leverage cloud agents to just spin up test and start playing with it. We're continuing to integrate across the networking platforms. We have more announcements that are coming up later this year, so stay tuned for that.